Alright, so let's talk about something that's been stirring up a lot of curiosity, the new Dan Heng form that's coming in version 3.6. And no, I'm not talking about the Imbibitor Lunae version we've already seen. I'm talking about his third form, often referred to as Dan Heng SP2, which introduces some surprising changes both in gameplay style and his overall role on a team. Save up to 25% on the current banners at lootbar.gg. All you need is your UID and server. The link is in the description. Originally, leaks suggested that this new version of Dan Heng would be a fire element unit. But recent updates, including information shared by Luna, a known leaker in the community, indicate that the element has actually changed. He's now expected to be a physical-type character, which honestly caught a lot of us off guard. It's a pretty major shift, especially since physical characters often fill very different niches than fire units. That change alone opens up a lot of interesting possibilities in terms of team building and synergy. Still, just like with any early info, we've got to be cautious. Things can change before release. What hasn't changed, though, is his path, which is staying as preservation. That tells us a lot about how this version of Dan Heng will function. If you're new to the game, characters on the path of preservation typically focus on defense, shielding allies, and improving survivability rather than dealing massive damage directly. So, don't expect this version of Dan Heng to be some kind of hyper-carry like Imbibitor Lunae. Instead, he's shaping up to be more of a support tank hybrid, the kind of unit you build a stable team around. One of the standout mechanics for this new Dan Heng is his connection to a dragon summon. But it's not as straightforward as him just summoning it like a regular memo sprite. According to what Luna shared, Dan Heng gives a buff to his teammates that allows them to summon the dragon. And here's the interesting twist. The dragon doesn't count as Dan Heng's summon. It's treated as the teammate's summon, which has some really cool implications for how it interacts with the battlefield. For example, let's talk about Phaenon. If you've heard about his ultimate, you know that he opens a domain where most of the fielded characters leave temporarily. But since the dragon is now technically Phaenon's summon in this scenario, it stays on the field while everyone else vanishes. That's actually huge. It means this new Dan Heng could open up advanced interactions and strategies for characters with unique battlefield mechanics, making him far more versatile than he might appear at first glance. From a gameplay perspective, this dragon buff mechanic is pretty unique. It's not just a flat shield or defense buff, it adds a sort of summon-based utility layer that could scale well with different teammates depending on how their kits function. If the dragon has its own stats or deals damage, we'll want to keep an eye on whether it scales off defense, attack, or something else entirely. Though that part hasn't been clearly leaked yet. Until we know more, it's better not to assume too much about the dragon's damage multipliers or its uptime. Now, as for release timing, unlike some of the earlier speculation, we actually do know this one. Dan Heng SP2 is expected to arrive in version 3.6. That's not just a rumor. Multiple sources have pointed to it, and there's enough consistency to treat it as reliable, and he's not arriving alone. March 7th is also getting her own alternate form in the same patch, this time as an Ice-type character following the Path of Remembrance. It's a pretty dramatic shift from her usual preservation role, having both of them debut in the same version, each exploring a new path and role, is kind of poetic. Honestly, Dan Heng's moving toward protection and team utility, while March is stepping as a remembrance unit, which is most likely related to her past. If you're someone who likes trying out fresh playstyles, or just enjoys seeing familiar characters in new light, version 3.6 might end up being one of the most interesting updates we've had in a while. And if you're wondering whether Dan Heng SP2 will actually be strong, there's another piece to keep in mind. Internally, Hoyoverse seems to be projecting A-rank sales performance for him. That's not quite the top tier like Phaenon, who's expected to hit S+, but it's still a very solid ranking. Historically, characters with A-rank sales projections have had strong kits, even if they're not absolute must-pulls for everyone. So while we shouldn't jump to conclusions, this does suggest they're designing him to be a genuinely viable and useful unit in a variety of teams. Of course, with any pre-release content, there's always the chance for last-minute adjustments, things like multipliers, buffs, or even the exact way the dragon works could still change. So if you're planning your pulls purely based on this info, just keep that in mind. Anyway, I'm really curious to hear what you all think about this new version. Does a physical preservation Dan Heng interest you more than his other forms? Do you think the dragon mechanic will be meta-shaping or just a cool gimmick? And how do you feel about March stepping into a remembrance role? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if anything else leaks before the patch drops, you know I'll be here to break it all down. Save up to 25% on the current banners at lootbar.gg. All you need is your UID and server. The link is in the description.